Happy Tuesday afternoon, everybody, and thanks for checking into our latest Trade to Black podcast. I'm your host, Shad Dales. Today, we got the news yesterday involving the DEA and the judge, basically Mulrooney announcing that this is going to be further delayed when it comes to rescheduling. So what happens next? One thing that we do know that if and when this new administration within the DEA does form, what are the key things they're going to be looking for with specific companies that focus on the research of medical cannabis, an important one, which is why we're diving into this topic here today on our latest Trade to Black. So with that, let's welcome in Anthony Varrell here on a Tuesday afternoon. Don't want to get too much involved into this right now because it is what it is, but I'm not surprised by the delay.
I'm not surprised either. It's the DEA is acting in a nefarious nature, and it is what it is. We've got a 90-day halt. Let's hope that the Trump administration comes in, appoints a new DEA head. We get the DOJ in there and Pam Bondi is AG, and we see some progress. Not saying that's going to happen, but that is a likely scenario. And we get some sort of resolvement to this issue.
Yeah. Got to hand it to Judge Mulrooney. He's not messing around, that's for sure. And quite honestly, it's well, like I said, it is what it is. At first glance, it's like it's too bad that it is delayed, but I guess these are the proper requirements made, especially if the DEA is speaking to anti-rescheduling groups and agencies.
Yeah, it's the theatrics so far, I'm not going to lie, have surprised me. The DEA sat in the courtroom on 12/2. Judge Mulrooney looked them dead in the face, said, do not submit the comments into the record. They're impermissible as evidence. The DEA not only submitted the comments, but they submitted them on a CD, those little discs that we all used to use, which wasn't even in the correct format that the judge requested for evidence to be submitted. The comments were supposed to be submitted on paper, printed out for the record, and they decided to submit a CD. It's a circus. The DEA obviously are acting in bad faith. They're trying to muck up this process. They've successfully mucked up this process. But you know who's been right? Shane Pennington and Matt Zorn.
Yeah, they have
been right from the beginning. Matt Zorn at the initial 12/2 hearing proposed a motion and I think another FOIA request into the DEA. He painted them as adversarial. I myself said that, well, he's probably going too far, and I don't think it's prudent to be painting the DEA as adversarial. He was right. The DEA don't want this to happen. Luckily, the DEA aren't the judge, jury, and executioner as it relates to this process. So we should see some interesting stuff here materialize, let's say, in the next 90 days.
Just another chapter. I know it's, an agency within the government. You got an inside look as to how things are viewed. And I think a lot of thoughts that we had pertaining to the DEA and cannabis, you think it's true, but when you actually hear it, you're actually surprised in some ways because you want to believe it's not true. But the reality is that it's pretty clear they don't want this to be rescheduled. But regardless of whether, this eventually the hearing takes place and a ruling is announced and rescheduling is announced, there's a lot of things that we've talked about in the past on what the DEA is going to be looking for when it comes to medical research. And we want to take a deeper dive into that, which is why we've been having, and we've actually been talking about a specific company here and there for the past 30 days. And it's Avicanna, which trades in the TSX under the ticker symbol AVCN. Welcome in their CEO, Aras Azadian, once again. Good to see you, sir. How are things? And Happy New Year. Can we still say that on January 14th?
I think for one more day.
One more day. I think we agreed to that before we came on. The 15th is the deadline day. But look, I know this is something that, you don't follow closely, and I'm not expecting you to understand the ins and outs. But as we said off the top, this ALJ hearing for rescheduling is delayed yet another 90 days. This is right up your alley when it comes to understanding medical research towards cannabis. Based on what we said, does it surprise you at all? As far as the DEA really, in a lot of ways, not wanting rescheduling to happen within the U.S.? Does this not, I don't want to say surprise you, but how's that sit with you when you hear something like that?
I mean, it's disappointing, but it's not surprising. I think it's a natural punt, given that it's the last week of this administration as well.
Exactly.
So, I think we have to be mindful of that. The new administration wants to do things differently. I'm hopeful. We all know it's a wild card, but I'm hopeful that they come in and they want to do things differently, and they're going to actually take a sober view of the evidence and all the work that's been done. So I'm just thinking it's the the end of this administration, and it's just a punt, and hopefully we can get the evidence and the backing in place in terms of a package to actually help them make the right decisions moving forward.
Yeah. So if and when that time does come for cannabis to be rescheduled in the US, the number one component I think for a lot of companies to be prepared for is going to be the research and development and scientific approach. Based off of that, like how have you, I guess, positioned your pipeline, especially compared to other medical cannabis companies that may lack some evidence-based backing?
I think there's actually very few real cannabinoid-based medicine or medical companies. I think everyone went for sort of the easy route to the market, which is obviously the adult use section and medical in the states where it's medical. So I think the approach between us and sort of the adult use side of the sector, which again I'm supportive of as well, is very different. We started with clinical indications. We started with, if you're targeting a particular clinical pathology, what type of drug delivery system do you use? What ratio of cannabinoids? Which cannabinoids do you use? And then you target that as a drug candidate initially. That's that's what we did, and then we ultimately transformed those drug candidates into a medical cannabis, let's say, portfolio or formulary, where the other side of the industry is typically starting with how can I sell cannabis, right? And whether it's adult use or medical legislation, they're taking advantage. So I think it's a very different approach. I argue there were very different types of companies, and because we've taken that sort of clinical specific approach for a particular therapeutic indication, we had to actually generate the evidence and make sure that if we're targeting, slow release, fast release, transdermal, sublingual, local, whatever the delivery format, that it actually does what we intended to do. So that comes with research, that comes with backup.
Yeah.
With around the overall conversation, I mean, a lot of our conversations that we have are around the adult use market, which Canada did legalize in 2018. Medical is still prevalent in Canada, and you're a pure play medical company. What are you guys doing in terms of, let's say, reimbursement, insurance, data, and being able to aggregate, let's say, a platform that patients can use, such as the MyMedi platform that's currently under the banner of Avicanna?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I mean, in a world where you only have medical, then you tend to have adult use consumers that are obtaining medical documents. But in a world where you have adult use and medical, and it's under federal legislation, as in Canada, the fact that there is a medical cannabis segment and sector is evidence on its own, from a practical sense, that medical cannabis does have utility. So why does a patient go through the process of obtaining medical documentation, talking to their physician, and then go to MyMedi, which is our medical platform, to get their products, rather than walking into a dispensary? And that means there's a couple of major differences, because obviously it's a bit of a work, right? So why would you just not walk up to, the overly supplied number of, dispensaries that are here in Canada? Why are you willing to go through that process? And that's because there is benefits to that for actual patients. There's hand-holding within their medical community, the physicians, helping them with the right dose, the right titration. There's also the pharmacists that we have in our patient support program that are helping particular patients choose, again, the right products and the right treatment options. Also assess things like drug-to-drug interaction. If you have a cancer patient that is taking chemotherapy meds, they need to know the particular impact that a THC or CBD product might have on those drugs. And you can't expect, a bud tender in a dispensary to be trained for that.
No, exactly.
So there's things like that. And then, of course, for me, one of the major, pivotal points is the fact that we bought this business from Shoppers Drug Mart, which is, the large pharmacy chain here in Canada. And they had established, really, for me, a world-class infrastructure to be able to do insurance adjudication, not just reimbursement, but adjudication. So today we're actually working with 16 public payers. So these are like work safety boards of Ontario, British Columbia. We're also working with private payers. So insurance companies are actually covering the medical cannabis for our patients. And today, I saw the numbers actually last week. It's about 71% of our patients are not paying out of pocket. They're being reimbursed or adjudicated. So there's the other benefit, right? So you're getting hand-holding, you're getting higher probability of success in terms of the medication or the treatment plan working for you. You're getting it covered, and that's the difference between medical and adult use. And ultimately, I think that's the recipe that we're going to want to see replicated in markets like the United States as well.
Is that day coming? Like I was going to say, insurance companies across North America, or for that matter, the world, providing full coverage for anyone related to medical cannabis?
No, it's not full. Like that would be a perfect world, and we would be,
Yeah.
a couple of billion-dollar company trading in the market. I think it's early. I think it's early, and they're covering things like palliative care, so end
Yeah.
of life treatment. They're covering some epileptic conditions, neurological conditions. So it's starting, and it's funny because I've been on calls with the largest insurance companies in the country. I'm not going to name them, and they'll ask me questions like, "Hey, Ras, by the way, is there any potential of cannabis or medical cannabis for pain?" I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, this is one of the biggest indications
Yeah.
that's been studied, and there's,
Yeah.
robust evidence around on that. So it's just the beginning, but the work we are doing in terms of, again, going through this adjudication process with our patients, seeing the actual outcomes that the patients are having, doing these in the form of a real world evidence study and or observational studies is going to help us generate what the insurance companies really want to see, which is pharmacoeconomic data. So this
Mm,
is me going to the insurance provider and saying, look, your population your chronic pain population, if you actually reimburse them for cannabis, the short-term disability, long-term
Yeah.
disability, opioid use, other, the abuse of medication can actually be reduced. And here's some evidence that that's already happening, right? So
right.
that's the type of package that I think we're going to develop. And to go back to your MyMedi question, MyMedi and our products in Canada, what we've done in Canada is designed to be a global proof of concept. And
Okay.
I always tell my team, I know Canada is not the biggest market in the world, but it's the only developed market, G7 market, that is federally legal. We're here, we're in Toronto, and if we don't win at home, what kind of proof of concept are we setting? But if we
Right.
do win, I think we should be at these discussions with these governments that are deciding how to actually enroll a medical cannabis program that can be successful.
Now with the MyMedi platform, with the data that you're aggregating, I'm assuming you're seeing their traditional medications versus cannabis medications that they're using, and you're able to aggregate very valuable data. Is that data then being used to, let's say, educate the hospital systems and the physicians that you are working with, as per the efficacy, to further the conversation that cannabis is a viable means of, let's say, pain reduction and other indications that you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to patient data, it's quite sensitive, right? So there's a lot of
Yes.
privacy standards we need to adhere to. But within that, with ethics approvals, with the right approvals, we are conducting a number of studies. So we're currently enrolled in about 5. And through those studies, we actually have these top clinicians from, Sick Kids Hospital, from Toronto General Hospital, the major clinical institutions that are actually aggregating that data. And, we have researchers that are aggregating that data. And this is all done within sort of the appropriate realm of research. So we are doing
Yeah.
that. But at a general level, tens of thousands of patients. We know what clinical indication they're prescribed medical cannabis for. We see the patterns in terms of what products they're purchasing, and we're seeing the percentage that these patients are staying and using these products for years,
Yeah.
years and years. The patients are using these products, so that means it's working. And I think that's a very important signal. So that aggregated data, sort of in an anonymized way, can be
Yeah.
utilized to make particular statements. And we're still a small company, and as we get more resources, as we grow, I think there's a lot of information here, and it really can
Yeah.
be perceived as a good proof of concept for us to all build on.
How is Canada viewed on the global scale when it comes to medical research pertaining to cannabis? Like, is it the leader in the world? And if so, like, do other countries, especially where I'm going with this, is that in the event we get rescheduling and you already have over 70% of your business through patients covered by insurance companies, like, what does that picture look like if and when, like, some of those opportunities present itself for you?
I think I would argue, I'm biased, that we're sort of undisputed leaders when it comes to the actual research and clinical evidence that's being generated because it's federally legal. Like, and it's not like Canada does not have some of the leaders when it comes to research and clinical development, anyways. So we're in Toronto, we're on University Avenue here,
Yeah.
where you have Mount Sinai Hospital, Sick Kids Hospital, Toronto General Hospital. We are working with all of these major clinical institutions that, in many cases, are top 5 in the world in their particular
Yeah.
specialty. But they're federally allowed to do the research, and we're
Hmm.
federally allowed to deliver these products to them and assess it. So that's why I think Canada has had a leadership position. I think the legislative sort of landscape has allowed us to do that, and you've had companies like Avicanna that have actually devoted all their energy for 10 years into that. So we are certainly leaders, and I think once further markets open, people are going to want to repeat some of these studies. We'll see more phase 3 studies that are going to be multi-site some of these will be repeated in other populations. But the fact that Canada, specifically Toronto, is also a very multicultural center is, I think, really
Very.
important as well from a genetic
Yeah.
perspective. So this isn't us just doing or generating evidence on cannabinoid-based medicine on a particular sort of population. This is quite diverse in terms of age, population, and the genetic mix. So Canada, I think, has had a head start. We are seeing, I've mentioned this to you guys before, we're working with probably about 8 international pharma, medical, CPG companies that have come and said, this is where we want to play. This is where we want to look at the evidence you guys are generating as a proof of concept to then develop their own pathways in other markets.
Yeah.
Speaking of the global opportunity, I know most recently you had shipped proprietary topicals to a multinational pharma company, as well as solidified a U.S. patent. The business right now, your core competency, correct, is the Canadian market. How are you looking at the global opportunity as it relates to medical cannabis in the true pharma patient-driven sense that you're going after?
I think that's a good question, I think. So I think first, Canada's proof of concept, right? So those products that we shipped to Germany have already been commercialized in Canada. We conducted, one of them is the deep tissue gel that, is designed to treat localized pain. We've conducted a pain study here with 100 patients in Toronto. Another one is a dermatology cream that's designed for epidermolysis bullosa. We did that study at Sick Kids. So again, international export, but the R&D, the clinical work was done here first in Canada. We filed the patents in the United States to protect the intellectual property, and that's sort of evidence that these products are proprietary. And what you're finally starting to see within that press release, the pharma company wouldn't let me name them because they're getting involved, but they still don't want to talk about cannabis. Is that people are coming to us for those products, for that evidence-backed, proprietary products that they intend to commercialize in their particular markets, and that was the evidence of that. What's interesting there is sort of the bonus there. I was very proud of that, small export, because that was actually manufactured in Colombia. So that was produced in our South American operations using our sustainable low-cost API in Colombia using Canadian technology. So that was, for me, a first signal of what we really intend to do. Canadian technology, Colombian API, combine them together, global marketplace for medical applications. And that's really what we're aiming to do.
So for those that don't know, as far as your supply chain is concerned, are you growing the plant material as well as developing the APIs in Colombia and then importing them into Canada for the R&D purposes?
For R&D into Canada, but Canada will not allow me to import, believe it or not. It's a protectionist sort of, in my opinion, restriction, but they won't allow us to import organic CBD, THC that has been cultivated that meets Health Canada standards for medical cannabis, which is GPP. We cannot export to Canada. We can do it for R&D, and we do it. We ship to our academic and clinical partners, but we're actually shipping that API to 20 countries or so today. So we are producing it. And again, for me, what I loved about that export was that was my API, my formulations produced at a affordable price, exported into international market. And I think that for me is the future, is, taking the Canadian proof of concept, internationalizing it, and doing it in a sort of vertically integrated way where you control the quality of the input materials as well.
You see Canada changing their thoughts when it comes to exporting?
Importing, right? The issues there.
Importing, excuse me.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, and this kind of goes back to your other question about, what does the world think about Canada in terms of medical? I don't think anybody is, except the big companies that are actually looking to make an impactful sort of entrance into the cannabis or medical cannabis industry. No one's really looking at Canada in that sense anymore, because people, unfortunately, mainly retail investors, look at Canada as sort of a failed commercialization of cannabis because of how poorly, some of the adult use companies have operated and the outcomes in the stock market. So I think Canada and Health Canada is under pressure because those companies are under pressure. If they had improved some of the legislation in terms of tax to allow the adult use companies that have survived to actually do well, then they wouldn't mind import of API that would potentially be perceived as competitive, right? But unfortunately, they're concerned.
Yeah, and how are you looking at vertical integration? Do you think the vertical integration is, let's say, imperative, like on a go-forward basis, with being able to control that supply chain on the cultivation? And let's say I'm sure there's a lot of extraction and synthesizing of the APIs that goes into that. I mean, do you see that as part of the business strategy moving forward? Or you have your core competency, you know what Avicanna is good at, and that's the medical side. Let the cultivators and the APIs all reside on that other side of the supply chain, and let the ones that know what they're doing do it.
So look, I totally agree with companies focusing on their core competency, and we're starting to see that in Canada with the licensed producers, which is great news, and more collaborative spirit, which is another good news. But in this case, because you have a lot of adult use companies, you don't have a lot of pharmaceutical oriented companies like Avicanna that are looking at the cannabis plant as a natural botanical source of API, that want to adhere to GMP standards, European and US pharmacopoeia standards. I have to build my own API. I had to in 2017 build my own API to control that. Otherwise, I could have the drug with all the clinical efficacy in the world, but if I don't have the supply chain, I'm not going to have the quality I require because everyone else is focused on recreational. Second, I'm not going to have the cost that's going to make these products affordable and approachable. That's why we took that approach. But what we don't do, so we're not fully vertically integrated. What we don't do is we don't do the manufacturing of the finished products. So if it's a topical gel, I'm going to a contract manufacturing organization. If I'm going to a tablet or a capsule, I'm going to a different contract manufacturer that has spent $100 million to put a tablet line that is fully automized and all that stuff. So why would I go reinvent the wheel and do all that capex? That is something you can outsource. So what I do is I deliver the API to the CMO. I give them my formulations technology. We conduct the tech transfer. Then I get a finished product. And in a world where the industry is more mature and there's good companies out there that are producing GMP API in a standardized, low cost, efficient way, then no, I wouldn't want to be a producer. I'd rather focus on the actual drugs.
And for those that don't know, API is active pharmaceutical ingredient. We're referring to the cannabis because I know some people get
CBG,
caught up.
Yeah.
Where do you see the biggest opportunity globally for growth in the next year or two for medical?
Brazil. Brazil is a big market for medical, and Brazil is one of those markets that will stay just medical. They have a really interesting legislation called RDC 327 that is basically medical cannabis, but you have to adhere to pharmaceutical GMP standards, and then you can sell it in a pharmacy. So it's for me a pretty evolved version of what medical cannabis should be. Obviously, European Union. I think more and more markets are going to allow medical cannabis.
Yeah,
those are the big markets, and of course, United States, right? If the U.S. gives any type of signal that they're going to open some sort of federal legislation for medical, we'll certainly want to be part of that entrance, and I think that's another huge opportunity. Australia has been evolving and growing quite fast, so that's another market we're looking at. But there is a lot of medical markets. Again, legislation, global, international, UN regulations does allow the export for medical purposes, right?
Yeah,
for adult use purposes.
Well, I know we were talking about pain off the top, and I mean, pain to me is a massive addressable market when you're looking at the medical applications of cannabis. Do you think that in the future we're going to see a just general over-the-counter analgesic that is cannabinoid based, replacing any of the mass ones that we see now? And for those who don't know, analgesic, Tylenol, Advil, acetaminophen, etc.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, Anthony. I think there's going to be some world in which CBD, maybe even CBG, the non-psychoactive cannabinoids, will be given some sort of monograph that you can then make some sort of claim. So you can just have CBD. Yeah. For example, if you have menthol in a topical today and it's above like 1% menthol, you can call it a pain cream because menthol has a monograph for pain because there's enough evidence to sort of back that up. So on one end, there is the over-the-counter kind of, monograph world where I believe the non-psychoactive cannabinoids may be treated as an analgesic active ingredient. And then the other world is someone actually doing the full clinical development. Like we're initiating a phase 2 on arthritis. That goes well. We go to phase 3. That goes well. You then have to go and argue with Health Canada and the FDA and generate potentially more evidence on more clinical indications and prove safety. So not only is that a drug, but that's a drug that can be sold over the counter. That's another bar, right? So I think for that to happen, there's two pathways, but yeah, certainly, and it'll be in our lifetime where you will have a cannabinoid-based drug over the counter, I think.
Well, as this industry grows, consumer trust is going to be key. And I know you've mentioned off the top, there's a lot of like when it comes to scaling, collaboration and working partnerships is key. And you've worked with Shoppers Drug Mart, the UHN, as you said, along with some pretty prominent hospitals that rank top 5 in their specific categories that they are located in Toronto. Why are these companies working with you?
I mean, our dedication to evidence, the robust scientific, rigor that we've always been committed to since day one. In the beginning, everybody was medical cannabis, right? But when adult use happened, everyone jumped ship. We've stayed true to that. And again, we started as a pharma indication specific drug company and then modified the business model due to sort of the necessity of the sector, access to capital, and actually commercialize medical. So I think we've earned that right to be the real medical leaders here in Canada. We consistently do research. We're doing symposiums, educational platforms for physicians. So I think it's a function of the DNA of the company. It's a function of our commitment to patients and to generation of evidence. And I think we take a lot of pride in that. That is, again, our DNA. And I think there really isn't anyone else within the Canadian market that is strictly focused on the generation of evidence and on medical. So the physicians, a lot of them, in my opinion, are pioneers that see the potential opportunity of medical cannabis and federally can do it, are looking around and going, well, it's these guys, right? So it's sort of a process of elimination, I believe, to a certain extent. But at this stage, we've sort of earned that right. And if we don't get that right here, where, again, this is our backyard and this is the only G7 country that's federally legal, then I don't think we have a right to try to export and internationalize. So this is why our focus has been here.
How much does that help, I guess, with your international growth, having some of these collaborations and partnerships? Because I'm sure that's part of your approach when speaking to companies in other countries.
It helps a lot. I mean, I think this is why the export we did was to a multi-billion-dollar company in Germany. Like these are massive corporations, and we're a $35 million market cap company. So it doesn't really add up. It's because those guys do the homework and they actually look in and they go, oh wow, okay, it's the top of this hospital, it's the top of that hospital that conducted the study. Wow, the evidence is striking. Wow, you have a patent on that product. Like the things that makes Avicanna a biopharma company, I think are hard to ignore for anyone who looks under the hood. And it's not like this is some study being conducted in a small hospital in the corner of some place. These are done by major institutions, by major key opinion leaders. And I think that's very important for us building our partnerships and our pathways. And the medical community cares. Like if you're speaking to a pain specialist in Germany, they care when they find out who's behind the pain studies in Canada. Because
makes sense.
Is very important.
So with rescheduling, I know we talked about that off the top, and one of the talking points around rescheduling is increasing access to medical research. Have you evaluated what that actually looks like if we were to unpack that statement and what it would take to enter the U.S., let's say, from a research perspective?
Yeah, I think there's, from a research, as in like sort of drug discovery, drug delivery, early stage R&D, we'll be happy to provide API or formulations, which I think are more exciting. Again, instead of just basic cannabinoid molecules, let's give formulations that people can test. And we'll be looking to collaborate with companies that have the appropriate DEA licenses or whatever to import. But I think the bigger impact is going to really come from a change of perception within the United States.
Yes.
So healthcare funds, biotech companies, pharmaceutical companies, all those groups that have historically stayed away due to the stigma are going to now be able to get involved. And I think the U.S. has the ability and for sure the power to accelerate that. And we want to be part of that. We want to say, look, we've taken this to phase 2. Let's go to phase 3. Or we've done the preclinical work on this. Let's go to phase 2. And this is the kind of stuff that I think is going to completely accelerate. And then second, I think if there's going to be some federal legislation that allows medical cannabis to be done at a federal level through pharmacy. We've built that platform successfully, with insurance coverage, with pharmacovigilance, with patient support programs and clinical guidelines. We've done all that already as a neighbor country. And we're very, very happy to transfer that to the right partners in the United States.
Hence the reason why some of the collaboration agreements is going to get your foot in the door, I would think. But do you believe that's happening? That's coming? Federal legalization when it comes to medical cannabis in the U.S.?
Wild card with the new administration.
I know.
I think my logic says, allow adult use and safe banking to transition and to operate at least at a state level a little bit smoother, but then allow first a federal medical legislation to get the adoption of the physicians, to take care of the patients in need first,
Right.
slowly roll out a federal adult use legislation. That would be, if I was advising this administration, that would be a policy I would recommend.
It's the military angle, I think, is going to grab the attention first when it comes to medical. But we had Erwin Simon on yesterday on our live stream, and he believes that that will happen under this Trump administration. And when that does happen, you're going to be able to export a lot of medical cannabis into the U.S. Do you believe that?
I mean, if you're GMP certified and if that's the requirements, I believe so. But I also, knowing my American colleagues and peers, know that if that's the case, it's not going to be for a long period of time. I think the U.S. is immediately going to get up to the standards and want to do that in-house because you already have most of the capabilities. You already have the cultivators, the extractors. You already have the contract manufacturing organizations. I think this is ultimately going to get produced in the U.S. and I don't think Trump's going to want more imports from Canada.
Well, maybe we're the 51st state by that time.
Right.
I do agree. I do agree with you in that regard. That the last thing Trump's going to want to do is us importing Canadian cannabis when we have the industry here. But I do think that we're lacking EU GMP certified facilities to actually create that input product.
But you have CMOs, right? Like you have pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities that are FDA, EU, GMP for certified. What you need is API. So maybe they buy the active pharmaceutical ingredients from the likes of Avicanna and partner companies of ours like MediPharm. But I don't think if your entire business model is let me prepare to supply the US for medical cannabis for the next 10 years, I don't think that's going to be really attainable.
Yeah, there's a large Pfizer plant that I've actually drove past in Kalamazoo, Michigan, that I've heard on several occasions has cultivation facilities within it to activate at the right point in time. And that whole facility is right up against a bunch of cannabis cultivation facilities that are in the adult market, but they're right there sitting on their fence.
Interesting.
It'll be an interesting.
I think the only entry barrier really becomes the clinical evidence, right? So if U.S. legalization happens and they say, okay, you can only sell products that have gone through preclinical development.
Right.
Okay, nobody has done that, right? So this is where I think the Avicannas of the world have an edge. Or products that you can back up in terms of at least having the pharmacokinetic, profile, and you can then give a clinical guideline. Okay, who's going to do that? Because that takes time, right?
How long is that window of opportunity then? 1, 2, 3 years?
Depends on the clinical requirements. If it's PK, preclinical, 6 months to a year. If they say we want, full couple, at least a phase 2 pilot done or something like that, it's a couple of years. But ultimately, there's also the drug delivery. How do you optimize the drug delivery, do the preclinical, do the stability? How do you make sure that product actually is stable? Because that's something that the legislations today, adult use medical at a state level or in Canada, even federally, doesn't require a product to demonstrate long-term shelf life stability. Right? So these are basic things that are not necessary yet.
Well, you grabbed my attention. I thought you were going to say Germany is the biggest global opportunity in medical cannabis heading in the next year or two, but Brazil really is. Like, I know I've been to South America a few times, and the way they view cannabis is just like, you don't even say it out in public. But do different countries view it differently? Like when I was in Colombia, it's very hush hush. However, in Brazil, is it different?
I think culturally, look, I spent a lot of time in South America. I just got back from Uruguay, Colombia, Argentina, and Chile, and cannabis is a huge part of the culture.
Is it? Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And I think people are more open about it. And I think, first of all, by market size, I think Germany is substantially bigger. But Germany's 90% flower.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, the concept of real medical is not inhalation products, and it's products that are drug delivery systems, evidence-based. I'm not talking about synthetic cannabinoids. I'm talking about botanical formulations that are designed to do a particular thing, to have a particular delivery, of the cannabinoid. So that's why I focus on something like Brazil. And I don't think it's more culture. I think it's more legislation. So, I think Colombia launched the medical legislation, which was compound pharmacy. It was absolutely faulted. I thought it was going to be a huge opportunity. It was absolutely faulted. Mexico legalized it for a week, went back. So I think Brazil is the most advanced. And I like the format. You don't have to have clinical efficacy, but it has to be pharmaceutical level production, GMP. If you're going to sell pharmaceutical cannabis, if you're going to sell cannabis-based medicine to my patients in Brazil, it better be GMP. Then you have 5 years to go do the clinical trials. I think that's a good model.
How big is the Brazil market rumored to be?
I mean, it's 200 million people, right? And so
Yeah.
I know it's a lot of people.
I think Brazil represents 75% of all of South America's market potential from a pharmaceuticals perspective. It's huge. I think the latest figures is the medical cannabis market in Brazil is projected to be like $250 million US. So it's not small, but it's getting there. But it's only CBD, right? It's tiny amounts of THC for now. But I think the RDC 327 legislation, which is scheduled to be amended this year, I think is going to become even more practical, and it's going to be a big opportunity. Why I like Brazil is they don't cultivate, they're not producing, they're importing.
Are they importing from Canada?
Colombia mainly.
Colombia. Got it. That makes sense.
Yeah, so we're exporting a lot there. We have a pharmaceutical approved in
Interesting.
Brazil through a partner as well.
Stick to one thing and do it well. You guys are doing a great job from what I can see and hear, and some of the people that we've spoken to within the industry, because I know a lot of the times here in North America, we get consumed by the adult use market and what its potential is. But let's just face it, in the early days of medical cannabis, I don't think there was real legit companies, and I think we all know that. But you guys were established, how long ago was this? Is it 10 years ago?
Yeah, this year will be our 10th year, so
10 years.
nine or so years. It's been a journey.
Yeah. Hasn't it? Yeah, I'm sure that I can't imagine what you've learned. I've been involved in this space for about 5 years now, and it just, things change drastically. Under the 1 month feels like a year in this industry, does it not?
Absolutely. And there's so many different aspects to it, right? Like cosmetics, medical, adult use, all very different, right? And I think the wild card for me in 5 years from now is food supplements. Are they going to allow CBD, CBG, globally to be nutraceuticals, to be in food supplements? And I think that's a huge opportunity with residual THC, kind of what you're seeing with the beverages in the US, right? With the 0.1%
Yeah,
THC.
good point.
So there's so many different aspects, and I don't think everyone should play every hand. I think people should specialize in what they're good at.
Well, look, I always like to have some of these conversations. Like we talk about, for example, safe banking, and we bring in some people from Wall Street and say, okay, what does that actually look like if and then what to happen? And what does it take, obviously, for institutions to get involved? And with this conversation, I wanted our viewers just to get a better idea that, yes, on a day where this hearing is going to be delayed, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But if and when it does happen and rescheduling is announced, what are some of the next necessary steps that people truly have to understand, and the companies that have to be prepared for that opportunity? But I think you outlined it pretty good. And listen, appreciate you checking in and giving us an update, Aras.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. It's always a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's keep in touch, okay?
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for watching our latest podcast. What'd you all think? Is there any information that we're missing? Is there anything you want us to cover? As these industries heat up, we're getting access to more and more big hosts. So let us know the questions that you want us to ask for you. As usual, smash that like button. We want this to go viral. Click on that bell for all notifications for the latest interviews that we're doing. And as usual, let's build this community. Subscribe to our channel because we appreciate it, because we wouldn't be here without you. Thanks for watching, everyone.